Welcome back to Botched View, where we dissect the latest trends and their broader implications. In today's video, we'll examine how the 2024 US presidential election not only revealed a cultural war, but also a major cultural shift towards more conservative ideals. We'll look at how this shift is visible across various demographics, including youth voters, and how the 2024 election echoes the rise of conservatism during the Reagan era. With increasing polarization, we saw a significant swing in votes, especially among young voters, towards the Republican side. Let's break it down. Over the last few years, American politics has been deeply divided over cultural issues, ranging from LGBTQ+ rights to abortion, gender policies, and education. In 2024, this cultural war became even more apparent as cultural issues were at the forefront of the presidential election. While Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and the Democratic Party largely supported progressive policies such as expanded abortion rights, gender inclusivity in schools, and LGBTQ+ protections, Donald Trump and the Republicans pushed a message of traditional values, law and order, and religious freedoms. The cultural divide was clear. Voters who supported Harris championed policies aimed at increasing social policies and expanding rights for marginalized groups. Trump supporters viewed his stance as a defense of traditional values, especially in relation to family structure, religious beliefs, and parental rights in education. This divide led to a heightened sense of partisanship and political polarization. One of the most striking features of the 2024 election was the shift among young voters, a demographic traditionally seen as leaning liberal. Historically, young voters have been a strong base for the Democratic Party, but in 2024, we saw signs of a shift towards conservatism, reminiscent of the Reagan Revolution in the 1980s. Back then, young people became an integral part of the conservative movement, and 2024 reflected a similar dynamic. In 2020, Democrats won the youth vote by a significant margin, with around 61% of voters aged 18 to 29 supporting Joe Biden. But in 2024, that margin shrank, with Trump gaining ground among younger voters. Exit polls showed that 47% of voters aged 18 to 29 supported Trump, a remarkable increase compared to his 2020 share of 36%. This shift was particularly visible in battleground states like Florida, where young Hispanic voters overwhelmingly supported Trump's message on economic opportunity, national security, and family values. This shift was not just about economic concerns. The culture war was a huge factor in driving young voters towards conservatism. The Biden administrations, including Harris, pushed for progressive education reforms on topics like critical race theory, sex education, and transgender rights sparked backlash, especially among parents and conservative-leaning youth. Many young people, particularly in suburban and rural areas, grew disillusioned with the left's cultural policies, seeing them as too extreme or out of touch with their values. Now, let's take a moment to compare this youth shift to the Reagan Revolution of the 1980s. Ronald Reagan's rise to power marked the beginning of a political transformation in America, where younger generations began to identify with conservative values. Reagan's charisma, his vision for a stronger America, and his appeal to traditional values resonated deeply with a new generation of voters, many of whom had grown disillusioned with the policies of the 1960s and 1970s. In the 1980 election, young voters, ages 18 to 29, supported Reagan in surprising numbers, particularly in suburban areas, where his economic policies and stance on national security aligned with the concerns of younger voters. In 1980, Reagan received 50% of the youth vote, a major shift from the Democratic dominance of the previous decades. Fast forward to 2024, and we see a parallel trend. Conservative messaging about economic freedom, limited government, and traditional values once again found resonance with younger voters. Much like the Reagan era, Trump's ability to speak to the concerns of working-class voters, particularly those disillusioned with the status quo, allowed him to tap into this wave of conservative youth. So, let's take a look at the actual data to see just how dramatic this shift was in 2024. In Florida, Trump's support among Hispanic youth, ages 18 to 34, surged by 14%, from 43% in 2020 to 57% in 2024. In Arizona, young voters went from supporting Democrats by 65% in 2020 to a 50-50 split in 2024. Across the nation, the overall youth vote narrowed significantly. While Harris still won the majority, the gap between Democrats and Republicans narrowed from 23% in 2020 to just 8% in 2024, with the Republican Party gaining 12% Youth vote across key swing states. These numbers clearly reflect the shift towards conservatism among young voters, showing that the culture war, combined with the appeal of conservative ideas, significantly impacted their voting behavior. Now, let's dive deeper into why this cultural shift is so significant. Over the last decade, we've witnessed a growing divide between voters who prioritize cultural issues and those who prioritize economic policy. For many younger voters, the Democratic Party's emphasis on social justice, identity politics, and progressive policies on issues like gender fluidity and abortion has become a point of contention. For example, the debate over school curriculums and parental rights has galvanized many conservative-leaning voters, particularly in suburban and rural areas. In 2024, a Pew Research study found that 54% of young voters in battleground states cited parental rights in education as a top issue, with many disapproving of the progressive direction the Democratic Party was taking on this front. The cultural shift we are witnessing is not only about political affiliation, it's a response to the rapid social changes happening in the U.S. today. This generation of young voters, like their Reagan-era counterparts, are increasingly finding a home in conservative ideals, whether it's the defense of family structures, support for free speech, or skepticism towards government intervention in personal lives. Before we dive into this video's conclusion, let's take a closer look at the differences within the youth vote. While the overall youth vote in 2024 showed a narrowing of support for the Democratic Party, the main shift in votes came from young male voters, who played a pivotal role in Trump's success. In 2020, Trump captured only 41% of the male youth vote of ages 18 to 29. In 2024, that number surged to 56%, marking an impressive 15% increase and gaining the overall youth male vote. Comparatively, young women saw a more modest shift, with Harris winning their vote by a significant margin, although the Democratic advantage was reduced from 65% in 2020 to 58% in 2024. This shows that while the shift in the youth vote was noticeable across the board, it was predominantly driven by young male voters. Why is this significant? The rise of young male conservatives mirrors a broader trend we're seeing in political alignments across the U.S., where gender differences are playing a more crucial role in election outcomes. Young male voters, especially in suburban and rural areas, are responding to messages that resonate with their concerns over economic security, crime, and traditional family values. In states like Florida and Texas, young men made up a larger portion of the conservative shift, with young male Hispanics in particular showing strong support for Trump's policies. In Florida, Trump saw an increase of 14% in support from young Hispanic males compared to 2020. In Texas, young male voters overall swung by 10% in favor of Trump, contributing to his victory in the state. These numbers represent just a fraction of the broader trend of young males moving towards conservatism. What's even more interesting is how this aligns with broader cultural issues, particularly law and order and economic freedom, which we will explore in much more detail in our next video, where we'll take a deeper dive into the male voter shift and its potential implications for future elections. The 2024 election has made one thing clear: the cultural war is not just a narrative, it's shaping the way young Americans view politics. From economic policies to social issues, we've seen a cultural shift that mirrors the Reagan Revolution of the 1980s, where younger generations are beginning to embrace more conservative ideals. As this shift becomes more visible, it's clear that cultural issues will continue to play a central role in future elections. What we witnessed in 2024 could be the beginning of a new era for the Republican Party, one that will appeal to an ever-growing conservative youth movement, similar to the wave of support that propelled Ronald Reagan into the White House decades ago. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the shifting political tides in America. What do you think about the rise of conservatism among young voters in 2024? Is this the start of a long-term trend? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video.